Sometimes letting go isn't surrender. It's emotional burnout. Not spiritual clarity, not deep trust, not some higher level of faith. It's nervous system fatigue. And burnout doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it looks quiet, detached, spiritual. Sometimes burnout sounds like wisdom, when it's actually the system collapsing from too much self-control. It's the moment when trying to stay centered, calm, aligned, or in the state starts to feel heavier than the fear you were trying to escape. When holding yourself together becomes another job you don't have the energy to do anymore. And this matters because exhaustion can look very convincing, it can sound like wisdom, it can feel like acceptance, but underneath, there is often something much simpler and much more human happening. You're tired, not because you don't understand, not because you lack faith, not because the law failed you, but because you've been carrying yourself alone for too long. So if you stopped trying, if you stopped affirming, if you stopped holding the state, not out of peace, but because you couldn't keep bracing yourself anymore, this is not a message telling you to try harder, and it's not a message telling you to disappear into rest and hope life fixes itself. This is for the moment in between, for the moment where effort feels unbearable, but giving up doesn't feel true either. If you stopped trying because you couldn't hold yourself together anymore, this is for you. This video is not going to ask you to try harder. It's not going to tell you to persist more, affirm longer, or hold the state with clenched teeth. It's not another instruction to push through exhaustion and call it faith. And it's not going to give you a new mental exercise to add to an already overloaded system. What this is about is clarity. Clarity around something most people never name. The difference between letting go as rest and letting go as emotional burnout. Because those two can look identical on the surface, but they come from very different places inside. One softens you, the other empties you. One is rest, the other is burnout pretending to be surrender. And if you've reached a point where effort feels impossible, this distinction matters more than any technique ever could. By the end of this video, you'll be able to recognize when letting go is actually your body asking for care, and when it quietly turns into withdrawing from life because you don't have the strength to keep holding yourself together. You won't be asked to force a state, and you won't be told to abandon yourself either. By the end, you won't need to force the state or abandon yourself. You'll understand how to stay present without pressure, and how rest can become a foundation instead of an escape. There is a certain kind of tiredness that brings people here. It's not the tiredness of doing too much in a single day. It's the tiredness of having to be strong for a very long time, of learning early that no one was coming to hold you steady, so you learned how to hold yourself. You learned how to stay composed, how to manage your reactions, how to read the room, adjust and survive. And somewhere along the way, needing comfort started to feel unsafe. Depending on anyone started to feel risky. So you became the one who stayed upright no matter what. That kind of strength has a cost, because when you grow up having to regulate yourself constantly, your nervous system never really rests. It stays alert, prepared, braced, and later, when you discover spirituality, manifestation, or the law, something subtle happens. The same pattern moves into a new language. Now it's no longer, I have to be strong to survive, and it becomes, I have to stay in the right state. I have to hold my assumption. I have to manage my inner world perfectly. And what once was emotional survival becomes spiritual responsibility. You don't just want things to work, you want to do it right. So you monitor yourself, your thoughts, your reactions, your feelings. You ask, am I aligned? Did I react wrong? Did I drop the state? And without realizing it, the inner pressure increases, because now there is something else you have to maintain. Your state becomes another thing you're responsible for holding together, another place where you can fail, another place where effort is required, and this is where exhaustion quietly deepens. Because the law was never meant to be another arena of self-control. It was never meant to turn your inner life into a performance, but for someone who learned early that safety came from staying composed, spirituality can easily become another version of the same job. You're still the one holding everything. Just now it's internal. So when you say you're tired of trying, it's not because you're lazy, and it's not because you don't care. It's because the same system that kept you alive before has been running without rest for too long. And here is the sentence that matters. The law became another place where you had to perform, not because the law demands it, but because performance was the only way you learned to stay safe. And performance always has an endpoint. Because no nervous system can sustain constant self-monitoring forever. Burnout is not a moral failure, it's a biological limit. So when you finally say, "I can't do this anymore," that moment isn't rebellion, it's not failure. It's your system asking for something it didn't get before. Rest that doesn't require disappearance. Safety that doesn't depend on effort. And until this context is seen clearly, everything else will feel heavier than it needs to be. Because you're not just tired of manifesting. You're tired of having to hold yourself together alone. This is where the first real mistake shows up. And it's not what most people think. The mistake is confusing rest with giving up. Inside, the dilemma sounds like this. If I rest, I fail. If I keep trying, I break. So you feel trapped between two options that both hurt. On one side, effort feels unbearable. Staying aware, staying aligned, watching yourself constantly. On the other side, rest feels dangerous. Like disappearing, like losing momentum, like betraying the law. So the system doesn't choose peace, it freezes. This is why so many people end up in collapse instead of rest. Because the body isn't actually allowed to stop, it's only allowed to quit. And quitting doesn't feel safe. Trying says, "I might survive if I keep holding everything together." Rest says, "If I stop, I don't know who I'll be." That's not a spiritual conflict. That's a nervous system conflict. The system enters collapse because it has no third option. It doesn't know how to rest without disappearing, and it doesn't know how to continue without breaking. So it shuts down. And here's where things get confusing. That shutdown can look peaceful from the outside. There are fewer thoughts, less resistance, less urgency. It can sound like wisdom. It can sound like surrender. It can even sound like enlightenment. But inside, something feels flat, disconnected, dimmed, absent. This is why the line matters so much. Emotional burnout can look like enlightenment. When the system is exhausted, silence doesn't mean peace. It means shutdown. And shutdown feels calm. Not because you're free, but because you don't have the energy to react anymore. When the system is too tired to react, it can feel like transcendence. When the body goes numb, it can feel like detachment. But numbness is not peace. And absence is not rest. Real rest doesn't remove you from life, it returns you to it. Collapse, on the other hand, pulls you away quietly. You stop wanting, stop imagining, stop engaging. Not because desire fell away naturally, but because you don't have the energy to hold it. This is where many people get stuck. They tell themselves they've let go, but something inside knows the truth. They didn't soften, they shut down. And the reason this happens is simple. The system was never taught how to rest while staying present. It only knows two modes, effort or disappearance. So when effort becomes unbearable, disappearance feels like the only relief. That's not failure. That's overload. And if no one names this clearly, people start judging themselves for a biological response. They think, "I must be doing something wrong. I must not be ready. I must not be aligned." But what's actually happening has nothing to do with alignment. The system is exhausted from constant self-management, trying to regulate thoughts, trying to regulate reactions, trying to regulate feeling, even spiritually. So the body pulls the emergency brake, not to sabotage you, but to survive. This is why rest and quitting get confused, because the only rest the system has ever known was the kind that came from giving up entirely. And until that distinction is made clear, people will keep swinging between effort and collapse, between trying and disappearing. The work here is not to push through, and it's not to disappear further. It's to introduce a third option the system has never experienced before: rest with presence, softening without leaving yourself. And that's what changes everything going forward, because once rest stops meaning failure, the system no longer has to shut down to survive. And once that happens, something gentler and much more stable becomes possible. This is where the distinction needs to be made cleanly, because many people use the words letting go and rest to describe two very different inner experiences, and confusing them keeps the cycle going. Letting go is not leaving your life, it's releasing internal control. It's the moment you stop gripping your inner world, stop monitoring every thought, stop checking whether you're doing it right. Letting go happens inside. You stay present, you stay engaged, but you're no longer bracing. Your body softens, your breath deepens, your attention widens. There is more space, not less. Shutting down, on the other hand, is not rest. It's leaving, not physically, but internally. You pull your energy out of wanting, out of imagining, out of participation. You stop caring not because peace arrived, but because caring became too heavy to hold. And the body tells the truth. When you're letting go, your shoulders drop, your chest opens, your breath moves naturally. There's a sense of quiet alertness, presence without effort. When you're shutting down, your body collapses inward, your breath becomes shallow or dull, your energy goes flat. There is less sensation, less interest, less contact with life. Letting go creates aliveness. Shutting down reduces it. This is emotional burnout, not surrender. Two people can say, "I've let go," and mean completely different things. One has softened, the other has disappeared. And here is the line that separates them clearly. Rest opens you. Shutdown removes you. Rest makes you more available to life, more responsive, more present. Shutdown makes you smaller, less reachable, less engaged. Rest says, "I'm here, and I don't need to fight." Shutdown says, "I'm gone because I can't keep holding this." The law responds to presence, not performance. It responds to where you are standing inwardly, not to how hard you're trying to manage yourself. So the question is never, did I let go correctly? The question is much simpler. Did you soften and stay, or did you leave to survive? One is rest, the other is collapse. And once this difference is felt in the body, not just understood in the mind, you stop mistaking disappearance for peace, because real letting go doesn't take you out of life. It gives you back to it. This is where Neville's teaching becomes much simpler than people make it. When he spoke about a state, he wasn't talking about effort, he wasn't talking about concentration, and he definitely wasn't talking about holding yourself together mentally. A state is where you live when you're not trying. It's the position you return to automatically, the place you stand in when you're not managing yourself, the identity you operate from when no one is watching. That's it. A state is not created by force, it's revealed by habit. This is why constant effort quietly destroys naturalness. When you're trying to stay in a state, you're already standing outside of it. You're watching yourself, correcting yourself, monitoring reactions. And monitoring always means distance. Neville was very precise about this, even if people soften it later. You don't get results because you hold a state. You get results because you inhabit one, and inhabiting feels very different from holding. Holding feels tense. It requires vigilance. It feels like something could slip if you stop paying attention. Living feels ordinary, undramatic, stable. You don't hold your personality together all day. You don't maintain your identity consciously. You simply live from it. That's how states work. When wealth is a state, you don't wake up reminding yourself to be wealthy. When security is a state, you don't rehearse calmness. When love is a state, you don't monitor whether you're doing it right. You respond naturally. This is why effort eventually exhausts people. Effort turns the state into a job, and anything that becomes a job requires energy to sustain. The moment spirituality becomes maintenance, the nervous system never rests. This is not what Neville meant. He wasn't teaching self-control, he was pointing to self-location. Where are you standing when you stop trying? That place tells the truth, and here is the line that needs to land clearly. The state was never meant to be held. It was meant to be lived. Burnout happens when living turns into maintaining. Living a state doesn't mean you never feel pressure. It means pressure doesn't relocate you. It doesn't pull you into effort. It doesn't push you into collapse. You remain. Naturalness is the real indicator. Not excitement, not certainty, not emotional charge. Naturalness. When something is natural, you stop checking it. You stop proving it. You stop asking if it's working. You don't check your name to see if it's still yours. You don't verify your identity every morning. You live from it. This is why people misunderstand Neville. They think the work is to maintain a feeling. But feelings fluctuate. States don't. A state is revealed through how you return, how you speak to yourself under pressure, how you interpret delay, how you respond when you're tired. Those reactions show where you live. And when someone is exhausted, it's often because they've been trying to hold a state instead of letting it become the place they rest in. You don't enter a state by tightening. You enter it by settling. And settling doesn't require effort. It requires safety. Once the body feels safe enough to stop bracing, the state stabilizes on its own. Not because you forced it, but because you finally stopped standing outside of yourself. That's the Neville point most people miss. And once it's seen, the work becomes gentler and far more effective. There is a quiet kind of guilt that lives under all of this. It doesn't shout, it whispers. I know the law, so why am I still tired? It sounds reasonable, it sounds responsible, it even sounds mature. But it keeps the cycle alive, because guilt doesn't rest the system, it tightens it. Spiritual guilt is especially sneaky, because it hides behind understanding. You tell yourself you should be beyond this by now, that you've read enough, listened enough, understood enough. So when exhaustion shows up, instead of meeting it, you judge it. You think, I shouldn't feel this way. I must be doing something wrong. If I were really in the state, I wouldn't be this tired. And the body hears that as pressure, not motivation. Pressure. So instead of softening, the system braces again. This is how guilt quietly turns into effort. You don't rest because rest feels undeserved. You don't slow down because slowing down feels like regression. You don't stop monitoring yourself because awareness has become a job. Guilt keeps you trying, even when trying is what's hurting you. And here is the line that exposes it clearly. Guilt is emotional burnout trying to look responsible. It feels like accountability, but it functions like self-attack. Responsibility says, something needs care. Guilt says, you should already be better. One opens space, the other collapses it. This is why guilt keeps the loop running. You're tired, so you judge yourself for being tired. That judgment creates more tension. That tension creates more fatigue, and the cycle reinforces itself. And because it's wrapped in spiritual language, it feels justified. You think you're holding yourself to a higher standard, when in reality, you're refusing yourself rest. Neville never taught guilt as a tool for growth. He didn't say, if you're aligned, you won't get tired. He pointed to something much simpler. States are revealed, not earned. Exhaustion doesn't mean you failed the law. It means something in you has been carrying too much for too long. And guilt only adds weight to an already overloaded system. This is why so many people feel stuck. They're not resisting rest. They're resisting the idea that they deserve it. They believe rest must come after success, after proof, after manifestation. But when rest is conditional, it never arrives. And until guilt is named for what it is, effort in disguise, the body won't feel safe enough to settle. Letting go of guilt is not lowering your standard. It's changing what you think responsibility actually means. Responsibility is not punishing yourself into alignment. It's noticing when effort has turned into harm and choosing care instead. And once guilt loosens its grip, something important becomes possible. The system can finally stop bracing and start recovering, not by disappearing, not by giving up, but by allowing rest without self-judgment. And that's where the cycle begins to break. There is a moment that almost everyone in this space reaches, but very few people understand correctly. It looks like giving up. It feels like collapse, and it's usually interpreted as failure. But most of the time, that's not what it is. The truth is quieter. Many people are not quitting. They are asking for rest for the first time in their lives. Not consciously, not in words, but through the body. For someone who learned early that love had to be earned, that safety required effort, that attention only came when they performed, rest does not feel natural. It feels dangerous. So when the system finally runs out of energy, it doesn't say, I need care. It says, I'm done. And spirituality often mislabels that moment. People call it detachment. They call it surrender. They call it enlightenment. But underneath, there is often something very simple happening. The body can't keep holding everything alone. This is the turning point most people miss. They think letting go means they stopped believing, that they lost faith, that they failed to persist. But in many cases, letting go is not disbelief, it's depletion. And depletion is not a spiritual flaw, it's a physiological message. Your system is saying, I can't keep carrying this without support. This is why so many people say things like, I'm just tired of forcing my state. I can't keep doing mental work every day. I'm done trying to hold myself together. That is not laziness, that is not weakness, that is not lack of faith. That is a nervous system that has been in self-management mode for too long. Here is the anchor you need to hear clearly. Letting go can be emotional burnout asking to be held. Held, not fixed. Held, not corrected. Held, not motivated. Most people were never held while wanting something. They were told to be strong, to be positive, to be patient, to figure it out. So when they encounter the law, they bring the same pattern with them. I'll regulate myself. I'll manage my thoughts. I'll sustain my state. And it works, for a while, until the system gets tired of being alone in the effort. When that happens, letting go appears, not as wisdom, not as clarity, but as relief from pressure. And here's the key distinction. Letting go is not the problem. Misunderstanding what it's asking for is. If you interpret exhaustion as failure, you'll push harder. If you interpret it as enlightenment, you'll disappear. But if you interpret it correctly, you'll do something very different. You'll offer care instead of demand. This is where the whole dynamic shifts. Instead of asking, how do I get back into the state? The better question becomes, what part of me has been carrying too much alone? Because states don't stabilize through pressure. They stabilize through safety. A system that feels held does not need to force belief. It doesn't need to monitor itself constantly. It doesn't need to abandon desire to survive. Safety restores naturalness. And naturalness is what Neville pointed to all along. When the system feels supported, the state becomes something you live in, not something you hold up. This is why true rest doesn't kill manifestation. It removes the strain that was destabilizing it. And here's something important to understand. You don't have to choose between rest and desire. You don't have to drop your vision to stop hurting. You don't have to disappear to feel relief. You can stop forcing without leaving life. The mistake was never wanting too much. The mistake was carrying it without care. When rest is real, it doesn't shut you down. It brings you back. Back into the body. Back into presence. Back into a self that isn't bracing. And from that place, the state doesn't need to be maintained. It begins to breathe on its own. This is the great reframe. Letting go is not the end of the process. It is often the moment the process finally becomes humane, not mystical, not dramatic, humane. And once you see that, you stop trying to interpret exhaustion as a spiritual message. You start responding to it as a human one, with gentleness, with permission, with care. And that is not a detour from the law. That is the ground where the law can finally feel safe enough to work. Because a system that feels held no longer needs to collapse to be heard. And from there, movement doesn't need to be forced. It begins naturally. There comes a moment where the problem is no longer belief. It's capacity. You're not confused. You're not unfaithful. You're exhausted. And when exhaustion hits, the worst thing you can do is turn it into a spiritual debate. So the bridge here is not a technique. It's a change in how you respond to yourself. Step 1 is this. Stop explaining your exhaustion spiritually. You don't need to analyze why you're tired. You don't need to label it resistance. You don't need to decide what it means. The moment you start explaining, you add pressure to a system that is already overloaded. Instead of asking, why am I not holding the state? Replace the entire conversation with one sentence. I am tired. No story, no justification, no fixing, just truth. Step 2 is to normalize the tiredness, not as a flaw, not as something to overcome, but as a natural response to long-term self-management. If you have been regulating yourself for years, emotionally, mentally, spiritually, fatigue is not surprising. It's expected. Tiredness does not mean you're regressing. It means your system is asking to be included, not overridden. Say this internally. Of course I'm tired. I've been carrying a lot. That sentence alone removes shame. And shame is what usually turns rest into shutdown. Step 3 is to choose minimal presence instead of performance. This is crucial. You are not asked to feel good. You are not asked to feel aligned. You're not asked to hold a state. You're only asked to stay present, minimally. Presence can look like breathing, sitting, drinking water, feeling your feet on the floor. No affirmations, no future focus, no correction, just being here, without disappearing. This is the reframe that changes everything. You don't need a higher state. You need less pressure. And when pressure reduces, the system begins to regulate itself, not instantly, not dramatically, but enough for the next moment to be possible. That's the bridge. Not pushing forward, not collapsing, staying. When everything feels heavy, you don't need insight. You need containment. Use this script exactly as it is, slowly, gently. This is heavy right now. Pause. I don't need to fix this moment. Pause. I am allowed to rest without disappearing. Pause. I can stay here without effort. Pause. My body knows how to settle. Pause. I let the pressure drop. That's it. Repeat it as many times as needed. Not forcefully, not urgently. Soft repetition works because the nervous system learns through tone, not logic. There is another mistake that appears when people are deeply tired. It sounds spiritual, it sounds humble, but it quietly removes you from your own life. It's the idea of giving everything to God as a way to disappear. Sometimes this is trust, but sometimes it's self-erasure, and the difference matters. Trust feels grounding, erasure feels empty. When trust is real, you feel supported. When you disappear, you feel numb. Trust allows presence. Erasure removes it. This is the line you need to remember. Trust doesn't require self-erasure. Burnout disappears when trust includes your presence. You don't have to abandon your desires to rest. You don't have to disappear to stop hurting. You don't have to become passive to be held. God does not require your absence. True surrender does not ask you to vanish. It asks you to stop fighting, and fighting is not the same as existing. If giving it to God makes you withdraw from life, from connection, from responsibility, from embodiment, that's not trust, that's collapse. Trust keeps you here, soft, present, human. It says, I don't have to hold everything alone, but I'm still here. That's the difference. And once you feel it, you stop using surrender as an escape. You start using it as support, which is what it was meant to be. There is a deeper correction that changes everything, and it's not about thoughts. It's about identity. Not the identity that tries to stay calm, but the one that no longer needs updates. This is the self-concept that stabilizes the state. I am the kind of person who doesn't need updates. Notice what this does. It removes urgency. It removes constant checking. It removes the habit of asking life for reassurance. When security is present, the system relaxes. And when the system relaxes, questions lose their grip. This is why the phrase matters. Security kills the question, not answers, not proof. Security. You stop checking not because you're disciplined, but because nothing inside you is demanding confirmation anymore. When this identity settles, movement doesn't arrive loudly. It arrives normally, as ideas that feel obvious, as conversations you no longer avoid, as small decisions you finally make without drama. This is important to understand. Most shifts feel boring while they're working. There's no emotional payoff, no sign that says, this is it. Just quiet alignment between who you are and what you do next. That's the bridge. Example 1. Money. Old state. Is it working yet? Check. Panic, tightness, new state. Notice the number. No identity collapse. Calm response. Move on. Same facts, different self. Example 2. A relationship or message. Old state. Why haven't they replied? Story. Anxiety. Withdrawal. New state. No checking loop. Presence stays intact. Life unfolds naturally. Example 3. Opportunity. Old state. Doubt. Delay. Overthinking. New state. Simple action. No pressure. Participation instead of waiting. In every case, the outer event didn't change first. The position did. When the question returns, and it will, you don't fight it. You listen. Notice it. Don't answer it. Return. Notice the sensation. Don't explain it. Return to the body. Notice the urge to check. Don't obey it. Return again. This is not about never having the question. It's about not living from it. Use this section whenever the loop tries to restart. Notice. Don't answer. Return. So let's bring this home. The question appears. The question resets the state, and the exit is not answering it. You don't fix the thought. You exit the identity asking it. And this is the truth that holds everything together. When emotional burnout is met with care instead of pressure, movement begins. Before you go, answer this in the comments. Just one sentence. What do you ask yourself when anxiety hits? And if the question comes back later, don't analyze it. Come back to this video.